Hello guys, it's Nick. Welcome back to my channel and another video. Today guys, I want to chat about everything to do with culture shock and India. I feel like those two words together always seem to come when you talk about culture shock. It's always usually in relation to India. Yeah, it's so interesting to me. And this idea came up because I actually had like a driving lesson last week, and a new instructor, I'd never met him before, so he was asking about myself and I was just telling about my story and how I've just got back from India. And he was like, everyone always reacts the same, like, God, it's like a different planet there, I'm sure, and you must have had such a culture shock going somewhere like that. And the way people talk about India, like foreigners, is literally like it's another world. It's so funny to me. But it brought me onto the idea of like, let's talk about culture shock, because it made me reflect, because when people respond in that way to me about India, I'm always a bit like, it's kind of shocking for me to hear that from them, because I just see it so differently. Obviously, I feel like India is just a normal place to me now. It's not somewhere that's like weird or different or anything, but it's funny hearing other people's perspectives on it. It also just led me on to thinking about, like, have I had culture shock in India? Because I have never had that moment where I'm like, whoa, Yeah, this whole video is just going to be chatting about culture shock in relation to India. Also things you can do to lessen like culture shock even happening in the first place. I was actually going to do this video in Hindi for like practicing sake, but then I felt like maybe this video, like if I do it in English, it can help someone. Like maybe you are planning to go to India, maybe you are wanting to go there as a tourist, maybe you are have a trip booked and you want to know more about people's experiences there. So I thought I would do it in English in case there happens to be any non-Indian watching who might find it helpful. It's really cold here. I have my coffee and I'm ready to get into it. Okay, so the first question is, have I ever experienced culture shock in India? First time I went, anytime I've went? Honestly speaking, no, I have not. I've thought about it a lot, why that is. The very first time I went to India was the start of 2022, but before that, for I'd say like 2 years prior to that, I was getting really into India. In my free time, I would watch videos of people traveling around India, mostly foreigners as well that already lived there, actually, like people like Carol Rock and like Namaste Julie. I was like looking at their vlogs, seeing their life in India. It fascinated me as well, because like I wanted to experience that. I wanted to live there. And so I spent so much time looking at vlogs of people traveling around India. So for me, that was a huge reason of why I feel like I never got to experience culture shock, because I had already researched so much about India. When you're seeing vlogs of other people around India, you can see the streets in the background in most cases. They're showing different things in India. You can see what the streets are like. You can see how busy it is. You can hear in many of them like the kind of noise in the backgrounds and stuff. So yeah, I think that was a big one, is I had just seen so many videos already of India that it's like I've seen what it's like. So I think that definitely was one of the main factors in why I would never had that overwhelmed, like shocked feeling. Sorry, I don't know why I keep doing this when I'm like overwhelmed. Like, oh. Sorry. I think another thing is, it just depends on your personality. What kind of person are you? Are you used to traveling around to countries and staying in, really high-end hotels and things where standards are very good, and mostly traveling to, very developed countries? And if that's been your only experience, then going somewhere like India will be very different, and it will be surprising for you maybe. And it also really depends on how easygoing are you. That's honestly like one of the biggest things, I feel like. If you're kind of a bit more, you have like certain standards, certain expectations, you're expecting this and this, and you don't want to be in this position, or you don't want this, if you're kind of a bit more particular, I think going to somewhere like India could be difficult. Likely those expectations or ideas won't be met. Maybe they definitely can be met, by the way, if you plan well enough. For example, there's always this thing about when people travel to India, they feel the need to do the whole budget traveling and traveling in the local, like a real true way to get to know how life in India is. And it's so funny, because like it's not even, I don't know why that mentality is about in India, because you'll have people who would usually stay in like really nice hotels when they travel and do all of that stuff and hire a cab or whatever else. But when people come to India, there's always this feeling like they need to do everything the local way, travel by train, travel by, backpacking type way to have like an authentic experience. And it's like not necessarily like true at all, like, because India is so diverse. That's not even necessarily a like local or normal way for many people. Like, there's so many extremely wealthy people in India as well that we'll get to that, all that in a second. I think that's a big thing, is like, how adaptable are you? Are you open-minded? You know, I think that, again, that's a huge factor for me, that I felt like I already had, in general, like since a young age, a very much interest and curiosity about like the world, other cultures, how other people live, other lifestyles, other ways of thinking, religions, everything. So it's like all of that has always interested me a lot. I just have like a very high tolerance and acceptance for like the world around me, whereas not everyone has grown up that way or has thought that way naturally or been exposed to whatever other ways of thinking. So I think that also plays a huge part in like how open-minded you are. So those are the main reasons why I feel like I never had culture shock. I think it makes me kind of sad when I hear about people having bad experiences in India in relation to culture shock. I was reading on Reddit, like I use Reddit a lot, and I was reading a post about this Japanese lady, and she had a 3-week itinerary planned for India. She had just started, she was in Delhi, and she'd only been there for like 3 or 4 days, and she was panicking. She was like, I can't stay here, it's way too much, it's overwhelming, my senses are overwhelmed, I need to get out of here. She was, you know, considering cutting the whole trip off, like, and going back home because of it. And she was asking like for advice on where else she can go in India, more quieter, like maybe the hills or whatever. It made me kind of sad. Like, obviously it's completely normal and everyone will have a different experience, and you know, there's no universal like common experience, but it made me sad because I do think that it's avoidable. You don't, just because you go to somewhere like India does not mean you have to experience culture shock. Foreigners, Westerners, a lot of them don't know or understand truly how diverse India is. Like, yes, obviously everyone's probably going to go to Delhi, or you're going to go to Agra and go to Taj Mahal, and most people go to Rajasthan, and you know, there is obviously those sights to see, and that's what probably brings a lot of people to India in the first place. But you know, if you know that you don't like being around a lot of noise and chaos, and that, you know, triggers or overwhelms you, you can go other places in India. You can go to the Taj Mahal and then leave straight away and go into the hills, or go to the Himalayas, or go to beach areas, go to Goa, go to the coast. There's so many options. Like, India has everything. That's the thing, is tourists come to India and then they just go to these chaotic, crowded tourist places that are all of that, where you're going to experience all of that chaos, and then that leaves them leaving India thinking like, oh, that's what India's like. India's crazy, like India's chaotic, and that's not all of India either. You can be in India for months and never have to be in that kind of chaos if you don't want to be. And also not to let that scare you also, because for example, I would have always considered myself someone that doesn't enjoy loud noises or anything loud. I like my quietness, I like my solitude. Even when people play loud music out loud, like don't use earphones, I hate that. Like, that really bothers me. If I'm not in the right mood for listening to music, I hate people playing music out loud. I could spend hours in the chaos of Delhi or Mumbai, wherever, and never feel like that overwhelm of the senses. It's just different for everyone. I kind of love that. I've definitely come to love it, like from being in India. I really enjoy that atmosphere. I love people being around. I mean, being in traffic and the roads can be crazy, and it's unnerving for anyone, you know, even Indians, and lots of chaos on the roads itself. But I also really enjoy that atmosphere of like the hustle and bustle and everything. And I love going back to my house in India, and then it's just like really quiet and like a quiet area. So what I'm trying to say is you can have both in India. It doesn't have to be, you know, that like, oh, India is this crazy chaotic place. Like, yes, if you go to a major main city, of course, but there's so many places beyond the cities that you can visit and see and spend time in that are incredibly quiet, serene, relaxing, like you wouldn't even believe. I think just to be aware that of your options, even if you do get there and you're overwhelmed and you're like, this isn't for me, choose another place in India. You know, you can go off your beaten track and go somewhere else, to another nice hill station or somewhere quiet. Another cultural shock that you hear a lot from foreigners is about the cleanliness. I can't even express to you the amount of times when I'm talking about like India and, you know, my story and stuff, and people always like to tell me, oh, I've heard it's very dirty there, I've heard it's unhygienic, and it, you know, that it's not like very clean, blah blah blah. I'm not here to debunk any of that. Like, obviously in comparison to say my country, is India more dirty and less hygienic? Yes, in general it is. No one's here to like debunk that or anything, but you know, it's also, again, it's just literally like people have in the West seen via media bad area in Delhi, and just that's shown, and yes, it's rubbish everywhere, not good, and then the Westerners' perception is like, oh, that's what India's like. Meanwhile, like, they haven't seen at all the complete other end of the spectrum, which is, I remember one of my first days in Delhi when I had gotten there, driving through like CP, Connaught Place area, and just being like, oh my God, it feels like this could be like America. Genuinely, like, that's how I perceived it. I was like, this is not at all like what you would expect. There was like beautiful palm trees, roads were really good, sun is shining, like modern buildings. There's so much modernity, especially, is modernity a word? I don't know. In Indian cities, like in metropolitan cities in India, Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore. That's the thing, is it's sadly not portrayed to foreigners in their media about India, because mostly what we hear in the West is, well, India's a underdeveloped country that has so much poverty and dirty and unhygienic, and bleh. That's what the media portrays. And it's so, it bothers me so much. And I don't blame Westerners for having that perception either, because like I said, if you've never been there and you don't know anything about it and you don't know any Indian to kind of rectify the information for you, then why would you know? You know, it's like me, I don't know anything about Thailand. I don't know what Thailand's like. You know, it's normal, but I think the main thing to keep in mind is just to try and understand how diverse India is. It's essentially like, think of it as like a continent in and of itself. That's how diverse it is. And if you're going to spend your whole trip in India, in, you know, the heart of Old Delhi, then yeah, of course you're going to mostly like not be seeing much modern buildings, and you're going to be seeing more rundown areas, old areas, more rubbish and less, you know, kept kept well kept less well areas. That's the thing, is just research the areas you're going, know what to expect when you go to the areas. And for example, if you do want a more like luxurious experience, stay in the 5-star hotels. Like, these people saying that you can only see real India if you do backpacking it's silly, because it's not true. And I'll tell you this from living in Pune, where I live in India. It's so many insanely wealthy people that I don't know anyone here in my country that is as wealthy as some of these people. Like, there is also huge levels of wealth. The amount of money that many Indians spend on weddings is, people in the West don't also see the other side. There's huge poverty and huge struggle and homelessness and, you know, barely surviving. 100% that's there. No one's discrediting that. And there's slums and difficult life for many, many people. But there's also the other side, which is extreme wealth and many people having cars we could not dream of affording and everything. So that's what I'm trying to explain, how diverse it is, that it's so wrong that there's the perception of, well, India is mostly like this, because it's not true. And another thing that I think naturally people experience with culture shock situations is language, and maybe not being able to understand, or different expressions. And obviously a language barrier may be there, but at the same time I don't feel like language barrier is a huge thing in India. Like, for example, do you need to learn some Hindi before you go to India? Or depending which part you go, let's say you're spending in the south, do you need to know Tamil or Malayalam phrases or anything like that? My honest answer would be no. I do not think that's necessary at all. Obviously I'm learning Hindi and I love Hindi, and you know, that's out of my own like choice. But if you are just like visiting India for a few weeks, and do I feel like you need to know the language to get by? No. Like, if you're traveling to India, most people are going to speak English in terms of the things that you're going to be doing, like the tourist sites, or, you know, places that you're going to go. More than likely are going to be touristy places, so there's going to be people speaking English around you. You know, people serving you and everything will be able to speak in English. The only times I've had difficulty communicating in India was with like cab drivers or auto drivers. Again, just depends who you get. Some of them have a bit of English, some of them have no English at all. So in those times, did it help to have Hindi? 100%, yeah. But if I imagine what would I have done in those situations if I didn't know Hindi, then I would use Google Translate. I've done that once before, actually, in Maharashtra, in Pune, with a guy who he only spoke Marathi. He didn't know Hindi, so I used Google Translate and it worked fine. And obviously it's respectful and nice to at least learn a few words or phrases. Like, like namaste, dhanyavad, a few phrases just to say like hello, like thank you, how are you, you know, basic phrases. But I think that's just up to individuals. Like some people are not, you know, good with languages at all and would not remember them, and you know, it's just, I think that's all down to your own interest of whether you want to be able to say those few phrases to people or not. Could it help? 100%. But do I think it's necessary to learn some of different languages before you go to India? No, I don't, to be honest. And if you are really concerned about anything like that, like in that situation, like I said, with a cab driver or auto driver, it would really benefit you to get a like tour guide that's going to take you around India, or someone that you know and trust, like yeah, probably a tour guide for most people. Another point is the staring. I feel like whenever I read foreigners' posts about them in India or their experiences in India, so many people are frustrated by the amount of staring in India, and you know, staring because they're foreigner and look different, or you know, whatever, different features. Yeah, I can definitely understand how this one would be frustrating and annoying and uncomfortable at times. Again, a lot of it comes down to like what kind of person you are. Are you bothered by it or not? I know some people who are extremely uncomfortable about it, to a point of like they wouldn't want to be outside much at all because of it, and then other people, like I don't really care like 99% of the time, and different factors affect that. But I think understanding before you go why that's happening makes you so much like more relaxed about it. The first thing is that staring in India isn't really considered rude. In the West, staring is like very rude. It signifies like judgment or maybe disdain of some sort, you know. It's considered rude, you know, if you're staring at someone, it's like, what the hell? Like it's very weird to do here. People don't do it. But in India, it's very normal. Even Indians stare at other Indians in the same way, I've seen. It's just like, I don't know, it's just very normal. And especially because you look different, you have different skin color. In some cases, you have different eye color, different hair color to Indians. That's why they're staring, because so many of them may have not seen in real life someone with very fair skin, or someone with blonde hair, or someone with blue eyes, because that's not the norm in India. It also hugely depends on where you go in India. Like in Pune, I get very, like, even though there's not many foreigners there, I never really get stared at much at all. Like no one has ever came up to me and like started talking to me because I was a foreigner or anything. Whereas whenever I went to Delhi or even Mumbai, you know, at the tourist sites, people are like wanting to take a photo with you and stuff like that. And honestly, that makes a huge difference, because the people that are at those tourist sites, the other Indians, a lot of them are from like rural areas or other parts of India where there's probably never foreigners ever. So for them, it's like, wow, we've only seen foreigners like, you know, on social media or online or on TV or whatever. They've never seen in person like someone with those features. So that's why it's for them, like, if you can imagine yourself in that scenario, you would also, I'm not saying everyone would go and ask for a picture, but you would also be like, whoa, like you've never seen that before, only through a screen, let's say, you know. And I think that people from the West don't really think about that. They're just like, this is so rude, like no one would ever do this in my country or whatever. But trying to actually understand where that comes from, genuinely 99% of the time, it's just curiosity. Like that's it. They're curious. They're like, for them it's new. It's usually coming from a very innocent place and harmless place. Obviously there's exceptions to that. You know, if you feel uncomfortable if someone's like, I don't know, undressing you with their eyes or something. Thankfully, I've never really felt that ever. I also feel like I can't comment on this experience 100% because I have like dark hair, I have dark eyes, and my experience is very different in India as opposed to someone with blonde hair, blue eyes, because I've seen the second time I went to India, I went on a group tour and there was this girl, like young girl, she's my age, but she had blonde hair, blue eyes, and she was getting swarmed by people. Like we were in the Golden Temple in Amritsar, and yeah, like it was, you know, people were asking them to hold their baby so they could get a photo of the baby with her. And yeah, I can definitely not relate to that experience because I've never experienced that myself, but I've seen it and I can understand how that would be very uncomfortable, especially long term. Like living in India, I'm so glad I do not have blonde hair because I probably would get annoyed about it. But so yeah, I can completely understand for foreigners that could be frustrating and could be a cultural shock for you also, seeing people react in that way, staring at you, things like that. My only advice, I suppose, wearing Indian clothing, or even like putting like scarf over your head and wearing like a headscarf thing, all of those things can really help like hide your identity a bit more if you are really bothered by the stares. You know, put on a pair of sunglasses, headscarf, like put on a kurti or something. There's definitely ways to lessen it for sure, but yeah, I think just understanding why it's happening and not taking it personally. And if that sounds like an absolute nightmare to you, if you're like, oh my God, I would not be able to deal with that, then probably just don't go to India. Go to another country. Okay, what's next? Okay, I'm going to tell you a story of 2 times where I did feel like shock. Sorry, my voice is weird because of this cold. So on my first trip to India, I had these 2 experiences. Let's talk about the first one first. So the first one is on my very first trip to India. So basically I was meant to meet at the airport my now boyfriend. At the time, he was just my friend. He was my Hindi teacher. I was traveling to India for the first time, and we were going to travel around together. I was at the airport in Germany. I had already finished my first leg from Ireland to Germany, and I was about to get on my next flight from Germany to Delhi, and I'm laughing there. I had told him the wrong day. So I had told him that I was arriving the day ahead than I actually was. So I was in Germany airport. I was like, at the time he was living in his village, so it's like 5 hours away from Delhi. I had said to him like, oh, I presume you're on the way now, you know, because my next leg of the flight was like just a few hours, I guess, or 6-7 hours. He was like, no, like you said it was this day that you were arriving. And I was like, oh, did I? And then I went back and checked, and yes, I gave him the wrong day. I gave him one day ahead than I was actually arriving. So I was kind of panicked because I was like, this is my first time ever going to India. My flight was not arriving till basically like the middle of the night. You know, I was like, God, I hope he will be there to collect me from the airport, you know? Anyway, the long story short is that he wasn't able to get there in time because he was also, after our trip, moving straight to Hyderabad. Like, he had got a job. He was moving completely from like one end of the country to the other straight after our trip. So he had to pack like lots of stuff. And he hadn't started packing yet at that point because he thought he had a whole extra day. Anyway, so I arrived in Delhi airport by myself. First time ever going to India. So I arrive in Delhi airport. It's the middle of the night. I walk out from the airport, and I definitely had this moment of like kind of panic a little bit, because as a foreigner, everything you know about India is a lot of it's negative stuff, and it's, you know, not safe and all of that stuff. So I was definitely worried, and at that time as well, I knew like very, very less about the cost of things, what was a normal price for a trip from the airport to the city and whatever. So I walked out, and I'm swarmed by taxi men and people trying to take me wherever to my hotel. I think I was mostly anxious because it was nighttime. It's dark. It's the middle of the night. You know, any of these taxi people could easily like drive me off into wherever. I would have no idea. I would know I'd be none the wiser, and whatever could happen. You know, you kind of go to that place of like worst case scenario. Luckily, I had a nice driver and got to my hotel. All good, all normal. But that was definitely a moment where it was like I had a bit of panic. But looking back, the fear was based on my already like preconceived ideas about India and about what I read and about what I've heard. And obviously you should be cautious, and it's better that I had that concern rather than just being like, yeah, everything's gonna be fine. I think that shock came mostly from the fact that I never had meant to arrive there and be by myself. Like, the idea was I was meeting him at the airport. That was my very first experience of like literally walking into India. And yes, I had a bit of, I wouldn't say I was shocked, but I had a little bit of panic just because my circumstances had changed and the plan had changed, and I hadn't envisioned having to, you know, be arriving alone. And then the second instance of shock I had was we were again in Delhi somewhere, and an auto driver like drove straight over a dog's leg. Sorry, that's not funny. I'm not laughing at that. I'm laughing because like that's the thing that I was shocked about, purely because that definitely wouldn't happen in my country. And for example, in Dublin, in the capital of Ireland, like there's so many homeless people here, so seeing homelessness, seeing people on the streets in not great condition is kind of like, it wasn't as shocking for me. I don't know, again, maybe that's also because of like seeing other people's videos, and you see that in people's videos in India anyway, so it was something I knew and expected. But that incident was like really up close. So the dog was there, the auto driver saw the dog, but they didn't care. And I think that was what the shock was, you know, because in the West people treat their pets literally like their children. Many of them treat them like a human. So the thoughts of being so careless about like an animal's life that you would just drive over their leg is like quite shocking for us. So I was, and especially because it was really up close as well, like I literally saw it all happen and it was like, whoa. So I did feel shock then. Was it cultural? I guess you could say it was cultural, because in general I have noticed, obviously there's so many people in India who have pets and love pets and also treat them like family and humans, but in general the general mentality towards animals I do feel is a bit different in India in comparison to say Ireland, and people do see them more as like a differentiation between animal and human, whereas in the West, like I said, a lot of the time it's like they consider them a family member. That was one thing that I did find a bit surprising. Like in that moment I definitely felt like shocked. Oh my god, did that just really happen? Like, did he just really do that? So there will be some things like that that sometimes you just can't like prepare for, you know. I didn't see that in any video, obviously. But yeah, it's just such an interesting topic to talk about, culture shock. I hope that some of this was interesting to listen to, just some of my thoughts about it. I do want to do another video about misconceptions that foreigners have about India. I know some of them I've kind of just touched on by speaking about culture shock, but I would love to talk more in depth about misconceptions that foreigners have about India, because they bother me. So I'd love to discuss that. But in general, my advice for people who maybe are watching and maybe, you know, are worried will they have culture shock or how to have less effects of that, honestly, research the places you're going. Don't just look at the tourist site you're going to. Take a look on maybe Google Maps, go into Street View, check what the outside looks like, go down some streets, get an idea of what typical streets in India look like. Just research the places you're going, research the places you're going to have to like walk through potentially or travel through in whatever way. I feel like there'll be like barely any room for shock or surprise if you do that kind of research and delve into the place you're going. The second piece of advice would be to lower your expectations. Like, don't have any expectations of this is what it's going to be like and this is what's going to be. In India you can't plan much. That's honestly the god honest truth. You cannot plan much. Jugad, as they say, jugad. So you just need to be very like go with the flow to have a good experience in India, and don't have too many expectations, you know. And the next one would be, do not feel like you have to do this budget travel hiking type backpacking thing in India just because that's what a lot of people do. It's not necessary for everyone. If you are really particular about your hygiene and cleanliness and you can't fathom having to use a dirty bathroom or toilet, then probably best that you stick to, you know, really good hotels, you know, use less public services and public transport and things like that. So many ways to get around that you don't have to experience that as much. And last one, just to be open-minded. I think really to go to different cultures and countries, you just have to be open-minded. Otherwise, you're probably not going to enjoy it and you're probably not going to even try and understand the place you're going. So just open-mindedness is key definitely for going to India. And also, I forgot to say, even Indians have culture shock going to other places in India. Again, this is just the key of like how diverse India is and how different parts of India are. For example, someone who has gone from the north to the south, or, you know, has moved from south to the north, vice versa, even they experience culture shock because it's completely different language in many cases, different food, different types of food. So even if you search, you know, like stories about Indians having culture shock for, you know, from moving from one part of the country to another, that happens all the time as well. Even just from moving from like a rural area to a city, completely different. There's no shame in feeling culture shock at all. I think that for a lot of Westerners coming to India, it will probably just naturally happen. Maybe even if you prepare as best you can, you know, it still may happen. But I don't know, I hope this video raises a little bit of awareness about what to expect. And honestly, my main piece of advice is just Do your research and just be an open-minded individual and you will have little to no trouble. I would love to hear any stories that you have had of culture shock, even if you are Indian and you have moved abroad or went on holidays abroad or anything. I would love to hear, no matter your circumstance, no matter where you're from, let me know your story of culture shock. I would love to know and hear about it. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, guys. If you did enjoy this video, please do like and subscribe. And I will see you in my next one. Bye.